We have the latest information on the next generation of Nvidia GPUs, more details on the delay or cancellation of the 50 Super series, as well as some massive shots fired by Intel and AMD's response in the handheld market. We have additional information on DLSS 4.5 coming directly from Nvidia and a whole bunch of other stories. One of my favorites is Dell head of product Kevin Terwilliger saying that consumers are not buying based on AI. In fact, I think AI probably confuses them more than it helps them. That's kind of refreshing to hear. And just Steam and PC in general seem to be absolutely dominating the gaming market. Interesting stuff, but let's start back here. So we have Nvidia GeForce RTX 60 series to utilize Rubin GR20X GPU family, and that the launch is planned around late 2027. Now, all my sources will be linked in the video description. This source is WCCF Tech, but they're not the actual original source of the information. What they're doing is capturing some tweets from our favorite GPU leaker, Copite7Kimi. Now, if you've followed the GPU leaks and rumor space for a while, Copite7Kimi has been one of the most prolific as well as most frequently correct leakers for especially Nvidia GPUs. And he's back at it again after having been quiet for a while. His most recent leaks were about the 50 Super series, which we didn't see anything about. Does that mean that Copite was wrong? Was he making stuff up? More likely, the Super series was planned, but got canceled due to memory prices going insane, and the main update for the Super series was going to be more VRAM. Well, now VRAM's way more expensive, which means that if Nvidia wanted to maintain their profit margins, they would have to increase the price, and then people wouldn't want them, which means they're not going to sell them. They're also not being pressured by AMD releasing anything new, so why do the Super series? So on that note, we have seen a lot of evidence that they're not coming out, and videocards.com has some information coming from board channels, which generally has some inside track from board partners who then get information from Nvidia. But again, this is how leaks and rumors play out, right, guys? There's all this chain of, do you end up trusting the information? But in summary, just more information that the Super Series is probably either canceled or significantly delayed. It probably was originally planned to launch at CES, but because of memory pricing, it just isn't coming out now. So I wouldn't put that against Copite as far as the leak track record. It's more likely that when Copite was leaking Super Series products, they were planned by Nvidia. It was accurate information at the time for what Nvidia was planning, but RAM prices went through the roof and they got canceled and or delayed. So anyway, Copite does have a pretty dang good track record of getting things right, so what is he saying? So the first tweet here is saying that GR20X is for gaming, and this is talking about Rubin series GPU architecture. Now, for the end user like us, that doesn't really tell us a whole heck of a lot. He has another tweet replying to High Yield here, talking about NVIDIA's new Rubin CPX, saying it's quite similar to GB202 with some obvious changes to the GPCs. Looks like it has full raster units, so full GPU with up to 256 ROPS. Could this be the RTX 6090, even though Rubin was supposed to be AI only? And Copite's reply is it's not a giant for gaming. It's GR212. As you see, GR100 is based on 2 GR102, looks the same as GB100. And again, he has the tweet saying that GR20X or 20X is for gaming. Additionally, what I think is more interesting, because to be honest, in my opinion, from the gamer perspective, which is kind of where I'm coming from, thinking about which GPU dies on some Rubin thing is going to be ending up for gaming isn't particularly that interesting in and of itself. I'm more interested in, so when does it come out? And then how much performance does it have, which maybe ties into the architecture a bit, but we don't really know the gaming performance of this architecture at this time anyway. So for me, it's more like, okay, when does it come out? That's more interesting. So Compite responded to the question 2028 question mark and responded with 2027 H2, so the second half of 2027. Now, again, would Compite really know this? I mean, possibly, but what he would know is what would be, if he does know anything, is what is currently planned at Nvidia. Now, that could change, like what happened with the Super Series, but he's saying second half of 2027. Now, if we think back to, so what does that mean for kind of release cadence? To me, it seems like the release cadence of GPUs is kind of stretching a little bit longer than it used to be. Like, you used to maybe get a new GPU generation in less than 2 years' time from the previous one. Lately, it's been stretching to 2 years and then 2+ years, like 2.5. And that's kind of what this is looking like to me, considering that we got the 50 series. We got the initial ones, I think, towards the tail end of 2024, and then we had them going into like beginning of 2025. The point is that if it was the second half of 2027, that's pushing out more into that like 2.5 to 3 year timeline. It kind of looks like to me. Now, if it was the second half of 2027, it would probably be, you'd think more like October into November or even December, because they like to get stuff out in time for like Black Friday and Christmas shopping. That's the way it's tended to be. So the launch timeline within the year, a second half of the year timeline, isn't unusual. But to me, it points to GPU generations maybe stretching out beyond the length that we used to wait. So that does then start to bring up the question of, so will we still see an RTX 50 Super Series? Because if GPU timelines were still every 2 years, then it would seem like if we didn't get the 50 Super Series right now at CES, then there wouldn't be room, because it used to be the case that you would actually be expecting the next GPU generation to launch at the end of this year, at the end of 2026, which means a delayed super release would mean there's just no room for it, because you'd be getting the 60 series when, right away. There would be no time if this got delayed. However, if the current plan is for the 60 series to release in the second half of 2027, then there could potentially still be time for a 50 Super Series if it launched in the mid or end of this year, because there could still be a year gap between the Super Series and the 60 series if Compite is right on that timeline. So in other words, if we're no longer on the locked 2 years between generations cycle, if it's stretching closer to 2.5 to 3, then that could leave room for Super Series in between, even if it's like 1.5 years after the initial series launch. So I think as far as whether that will happen, probably depends on what happens with RAM prices. Because if RAM prices don't come down midway through this year, then I still think it wouldn't make sense to launch the Super Series. And the only thing that might kick Nvidia into gear on that would be if AMD fired off with some unexpected development that put pressure on the 50 series and prompted a Super Series. But I kind of think that's a bit unlikely. And even if it happened, another possible response from Nvidia would just be to cut prices a little bit on the current 50 series, which they probably wouldn't want to do. But anyway, they have been known to adjust pricing a bit if they're actually facing stiff competition. So that seems to be where we're at with the next generation of Nvidia GPUs. Nothing was announced, likely at least a delay, potentially a cancel on the Super. 60 series, 2027 second half. But if that's the case, it might still leave room for a delayed Super Series rather than a cancellation. But if that's depending on memory prices, Yeah, right now we're seeing things like Samsung reaps memory dividends as operating profits surge by 3x. These memory companies do not want to drop prices. If they can keep ramping up prices as they sell to data centers, and data centers are still wanting crazy amounts of RAM and can't get it, and so they're going to pay what they need to pay to get it. And if those AI investments keep booming, then there's no reason for it to come down. Something has to give here. And really, it would have to be that the data centers would need to have reduced demand or unwilling to pay the big prices, which is only going to happen if something changes with the AI market. Now, another potential question people have been asking is, would Nvidia be willing to actually, instead of launching like a new Super Series, what about relaunching older graphics cards that would potentially be less expensive because they'd be on older process nodes? Now, one problem with that is that wouldn't necessarily solve the RAM-related pricing issues unless you're launching GPUs with lower RAM price. Although older graphics cards have older types of VRAM, which might be a bit less expensive than the GDDR7. So, there's some potential, price advantages to doing this. Now, I found this at WCCF Tech, but it looks like the question was asked directly to Jensen Huang by Tom's Hardware. So Tom's Hardware directly asked Jensen Huang, CEO of Nvidia, I guess I should clarify for anybody who doesn't know, but so asking the CEO of Nvidia, the prices of gaming GPUs, especially the latest and greatest, are really becoming high, which might be due to some restrictions on supply and production capacity, one would assume. Do you think that maybe spinning up production on some of the older generation GPUs on older process nodes where there might be more available production capacity would help that? Or maybe also increasing the supply of GPUs with lower amounts of DRAM? Are there steps that could be taken or any specific color you could give us on that? And Jensen Huang's response is basically like, hey, that's not a bad idea. Maybe I could think about that. To me, this doesn't sound like, yeah, we're definitely doing that. But he says, yeah, possibly. And we could possibly, depending on which generation, we could also bring the latest generation AI technology to the previous generation GPUs. And that will require a fair amount of engineering, but it's also within the realm of possibility. I'll go back and take a look at this. It's a good idea. So he's saying that the idea of bringing out new runs of old GPUs is a good idea, but he's not saying it's already happened. So to be clear. Now, he's also, focusing on, well, we could bring the latest AI technology to those older GPUs. That's also interesting because does that mean that could our new run of 20 or 30 series GPUs, if that's what he's thinking, support like frame generation, which they currently don't? Because that's been a bit of an elephant in the room when it comes to all of the DLSS updates that have been happening, which is that initially the 40 series got frame generation while the 20 and 30 series didn't. And NVIDIA's claimed reasoning was that the 40 series GPUs had a hardware component that helped with optical flow analysis and acceleration. Now, which is used in the frame generation. The 20 and 30 series GPUs did not have that hardware. But recently, NVIDIA's updates to frame generation have moved away from using the hardware block for the optical flow analysis. Instead, they've been doing that through AI, which is accelerated on the tensor cores. So that's brought up the question of, well, if they're not using that optical flow hardware anymore, and the 20 and 30 series GPUs do actually have tensor cores, then shouldn't they actually be able to support frame generation? Is that potentially what Jensen Huang is actually hinting at here? And now that 20 and 30 series GPUs aren't necessarily competing as directly with the 40 series when it launched, maybe NVIDIA would be more open to having that actually, go on those GPUs, maybe. So it's something interesting to think about. However, there is a potential problem with that, which would be if the 40 series and 50 series GPUs are doing that optical flow analysis using FP8, which I don't know if they are, that's something that's not supported on the 20 and 30 series GPUs, which might mean that even if they technically could do it, it would be slow, which is an issue that we're seeing with the current DLSS 4.5 super resolution. Now, to be clear, this is not talking about frame generation, so I'm moving to a little bit of a different but related topic here, about how even though the 20 and 30 series GPUs do have tensor cores to accelerate AI inferencing, they don't support all the versions of that the 40 and 50 series do, which do support FP8. Now, I already did my DLSS 4.5 super resolution review. You may have seen that video. And in that video, I tested out the new model on the 20 and 30 series and saw that it was not very performant. Not at all. So that's where that could have an issue. Now, NVIDIA themselves have now actually released an FAQ to explain some of those same things that I was pointing out in my video. So just to be clear, they now have an official post on this. Now, they also highlight something that I didn't mention in my review, which is that when you're using ray reconstruction, that has not been updated to the second generation transformer model. So if you are using upscaling but want to use ray reconstruction, the new model is not supported. I didn't mention that in my video, so I'm highlighting that here. The other things they're mentioning here are things that I mentioned in my video, which is basically that the new model is Model M and Model L. And that Model L is designed around ultra performance mode, and it's very, very heavy. So you shouldn't use Model L unless you're using ultra performance upscaling. Now, one thing I didn't say in my video, because at the time of filming, to my knowledge, NVIDIA hadn't explicitly stated this publicly, is that Model M is best used for performance mode upscaling. But it does support quality and balanced modes as well as DLAA. So they are clear that both Model M and L do support quality balanced performance, DLAA, ultra performance. They can both do all of them. They're saying that you'll get the best trade-off between performance and image quality when using Model M for performance mode upscaling and Model L for ultra performance mode upscaling. You can still use them for all of the other modes. But that potentially the trade-off between image quality and performance, because they're heavy models, doesn't make sense unless you're using those more aggressive upscaling modes. So that's an important note and is now explicitly stated by NVIDIA. Anyway, so again, they're also acknowledging that the 20 and 30 series GPUs, because they don't support FP8, these models are very heavy and should probably stay on Model K. I like, as I stated in my review, that NVIDIA has at least given 20 and 30 series users the option of using these. I do wonder if they should make it more obvious in the NVIDIA app when you're doing the override that 20 and 30 series users should probably use these only with like a warning attached. So that's where I think they should maybe improve things, is within the NVIDIA app when you're doing the override. And again, I explained how to do all of this in my DLSS 4.5 review. So see that video. This is kind of a follow-up to that. I do think it would be nice if when selecting Model M or selecting the latest model, that the app maybe pop up a warning for the 20 and 30 series users, just mentioning that they may see worse performance despite the better image quality because of the lack of FP8 support. I think making that more obvious to the end user would be nice, because most end users aren't watching my video. They're not watching, and they're not going to the NVIDIA forum and reading this article, right? Most people aren't going to have access to that information. So I do worry that the end user might just set DLSS override to latest, use it, notice performance is bad, and not have any idea why that's happening to them. So that's just I think that would be an improvement to the user experience if they just called that out within the NVIDIA app. Now, I want to talk about this. Well, AMD and Intel didn't do a whole lot for desktop GPU gamers. There is a bit of a spat going on here related to the handheld gaming PC market. So, talking to PC World, Intel has accused AMD of selling ancient silicon, warning that they are primed to take over the handheld gaming space. While Intel has had some gaming handhelds, like MSI Claw models, the vast majority of the handheld gaming PC market is dominated by AMD APUs right now. But Intel is claiming that their Panther Lake architecture has become so much more advanced that it is going to do a much better job for handheld gaming than AMD, and AMD is selling ancient silicon. Now, AMD has fired back, saying that Panther Lake has too much baggage for handheld PC use. So there's a lot going on here. Now, I'm going to be honest, I'm kind of on Intel's side here. One of my biggest issues with AMD's APUs that they just launched is that they're continuing to use RDNA 3.5 GPU architecture, which does not support any of the more advanced upscaling algorithms, like FSR4. And I think that that's a pretty huge disadvantage compared to Intel's integrated GPUs, which do support their latest versions of XeSS upscaling and frame generation. I care more about the upscaling, though, which is AI-based upscaling and can often have significant image quality benefits compared to FSR3, which is what AMD's handhelds support. Now, I really want to see reviews of actual gaming handhelds before you can make a call, but I'm going to definitely have my eye on this space because I do a lot of handheld gaming on my Steam Deck. I'm interested in the handheld gaming space. I find it very convenient for my old dad lifestyle. It can be very convenient to game on handhelds. Just a lot simpler and easier to fit into my schedule than necessarily getting over to my actual gaming PC desk all the time. Like I have 20 minutes to game before bed. Way easier to just lay in bed with my handheld and then just set it on the nightstand, right? It's just a lot simpler that way. So I've got my eye on the space. Now, Intel is claiming that they're going to have a version of Panther Lake which is specifically designed around gaming handhelds. And that's actually one of the things that AMD, if you actually read the full quotes here, all my sources will be in the video description. The AMD representative here was saying that AMD makes these custom handheld focused chips like their Z2 series, which is specifically architected for the handheld space rather than just laptops. And they're claiming that Intel doesn't do that. However, Intel has specifically stated that there will be a version of Panther Lake that is designed specifically for handhelds. Now, they haven't released any of the specific details on that, though, but they did explicitly state that at CES. Now, videocards.com is claiming some exclusive inside information that not only will Panther Lake be doing that, but videocards.com is claiming that they're going to be called Core G3, and they will feature up to 12 CPU cores, although some cut-down models will have fewer, and 12 Xe3 GPU cores, which is pretty interesting because we do already have some benchmark results testing out Panther Lake chips with 12 Xe3 GPU cores. To be clear, though, those are laptops, not handhelds, and might be running at a higher wattage than what the handheld chip would do. But Tom's Hardware does have some benchmark numbers right here for some of these Panther Lake chips. Again, not the handheld versions. These are the laptop versions. Running games at pretty decent frame rates for handheld, guys. I'm not saying this is what I'd want on my main gaming desktop, but on a handheld, running 1200p with XeSS quality. And again, this is the XMX AI, full XeSS quality that you're getting here. Getting 68.4 FPS at 1200p in Baldur's Gate 3, again with some quality level upscaling though, but at high graphics settings. Cyberpunk 2077's built-in benchmark, averaging 81.4 FPS at 1080p high, although using XeSS balanced. But again, this is where one of the places, running XeSS is one of the places where I feel like the Intel Panther Lake chips have an advantage over AMD. Because XeSS balanced, especially the XeSS version that is XMX accelerated, not the version that's compatible on AMD hardware, I want to be clear on that. The full Intel version runs better image quality than the platform agnostic DP4A accelerated version that you can run on AMD. So again, that's one of the places where there's an advantage here. So yes, it's using upscaling, but it's using a pretty high quality AI accelerated version of that. 1080p high settings, 81.4 FPS at 1080p. Doom the Dark Ages, which requires the use of ray tracing and is running at high settings at 1080p, although again, balance level upscaling, they're claiming 51.1 FPS average. F1 2025 built-in benchmark, apparently running the Australia with the day set to clear at 1080p high settings with XeSS balanced, was coming out at almost 110 frames per second. Now, Monster Hunter Wilds is pretty famously unoptimized. However, they were still managing over 30 FPS average with even the 1% lows at almost 30 FPS, but that's at 1200p. Imagine that on a handheld screen, right? XeSS balanced. Now, it was only the medium preset, but again, Monster Hunter Wilds, pretty hard to run game. So running at 30 FPS on a handheld at 1200p, even with some upscaling, kind of impressive in my opinion. And Marvel's Spider-Man 2, almost a 60 FPS average at 1080p high using XeSS quality. Now, it does mention in the Tom's Hardware review that they had some software issues. Again, that's one of the issues with the Intel GPUs at this point, is sometimes there's some weird software glitches still, etc. It's been getting way better, but it's still not perfect. And again, this is the Panther Lake laptops and probably running at a power constraint that wouldn't make sense on the handheld version. So I would imagine all of that performance would be scaled down a bit. But that sounds pretty enticing to me. Enough so that I might hold off on buying this, because I'm going to be honest, guys, I was pretty tempted to buy a Legion Go 2 once it had the SteamOS official version. Now, good news is the SteamOS version has been now confirmed by Lenovo, and it launches in June. Now it's $1,200, which kind of sucks. But I am a spoiled YouTuber and could manage that. If, again, for my dad gaming on a handheld, the Steam Deck OLED is great, but there's some games it just can't run super well. Legion Go 2 keeps an OLED display, should offer variable refresh rate support, at least it does in the Windows version. I would assume the SteamOS version could handle that, hopefully. 144 hertz, 1920 by 1200, 8.8-inch display, Z2 Extreme processor, which comes with the 16 RDNA 3.5 compute units. This is a pretty hefty upgrade over the Steam Deck OLED, and I like SteamOS a lot. But man, I'm interested in if the Panther Lake handhelds actually play out how I hope they do. That being said, though, another place AMD might have an advantage in the handheld space is SteamOS support, because AMD plays really nicely with SteamOS. I don't know if Panther Lake would, so that's another question mark there. But either way, I like competition, and Panther Lake is kind of exciting to me. This is a potential sign that Intel is firing back a little bit here. So I want competition, because it's not good for anybody when we get stagnation. Now, speaking of kind of stagnation, the most we got from AMD at CES from the consumer side of things was the 9850X3D, which is just slightly higher clock speeds on a CPU that we already have. That's not super exciting, but hey, it's something. That being said, though, there's been some rumors of a 9950X3D2, which would have the 3D V cache on both dies. That would be interesting. And there was a bunch of headlines saying that Alienware confirmed it, even though AMD didn't. Because there was literally this post from Alienware specifically saying that they're launching one with the Ryzen 9 9950X 3D2, second generation 3D V-Cache technology. Boom, right there. However, they have retracted that statement. So this is more of a clarification that that was apparently false. So videocards.com originally ran this story, but they have now updated it, saying that a representative from the Dell PR team, remember Alienware is owned by Dell, has provided the following clarification. The Alienware Area 51 desktop will be configured with AMD's Ryzen 7 9850X 3D, which was announced at CES. It will not have the rumored 9950X 3D 2 chip. That being said, guys, Computer Base has said that AMD told them directly that a Ryzen 9 9950X 3D 2, well, they said stay tuned. They didn't say confirmed or unconfirmed. They specifically said stay tuned. So it's very possible that this thing is actually happening, but since AMD hasn't confirmed it yet, Dell had to walk it back because they might not be allowed to talk about it yet. That being said, maybe it was just a typo. Who knows? Now, I want to talk about this because one of the most frustrating things about this CES, and if you watch Gamers Nexus, he's definitely been highlighting this frustration, is that this is a consumer electronics show, and most of the big presentations were just talking about data center AI products. And that's been so frustrating because, in my opinion, most end consumers don't care all that much about AI. So, especially the data center side of things. But this quote from Dell is explaining why Dell's presentation didn't actually focus that much on AI at the Consumer Electronics Expo. Not because their PCs aren't AI PCs that support Copilot and all of that, but because Dell has actually realized that the end consumer who buys a PC doesn't really care about AI that much. This is a direct quote of Dell's head of product. They're not buying based on AI. In fact, I think AI probably confuses them more than it helps them. This is coming from a PC Gamer article where they have a bit of a longer direct quote if we go down to that. It says, one thing you'll notice is the message we delivered around our products was not AI first. So a bit of a shift from a year ago where we were all about the AI PC. We're very focused on delivering upon the AI capabilities of a device. In fact, everything that we're announcing has an NPU in it. But what we've learned over the course of this year, especially from a consumer perspective, is they're not buying based on AI. In fact, I think AI probably confuses them more than it helps them understand a specific outcome. I love this. Finally, admitting that, yes, maybe investors love AI. Maybe data center stuff makes you tons of money off of AI. But the end PC consumer who buys a PC, most of them, now I know some of them care a lot about AI, but most of them aren't buying based on the AI capability of the PC. And Dell seems to be finally realizing and admitting that. Let's see if the rest of the market comes around to this. Now, speaking of the market, though, PC's looking good. Gaming PC space is seeming to just grow and grow and grow compared to consoles. I'm seeing this article here from WCCF Tech quoting the developer of Danganronpa. I don't play this. I don't know how to pronounce that. But anyway, he says the market is dominated by PC now and is highlighting that there's been a shift in the industry. Kind of corroborating that, we also have this article saying that Arc Raiders helped pushed Steam to have its highest grossing December yet, and they seem to be validating that based on statistics from Alinea, again, don't know how to pronounce it, their stats saying that the December numbers for 2025 were up 22.7% over December 2024, and even more than December's 2020 high of 1.4 billion. So PC space overall is growing. The gaming PC market is growing. So while there's a lot of negativity there, it's still a good place to do gaming, so we'll try to still focus on some positives. Hopefully the RAM nonsense gets a little bit under control. Hopefully you guys found today's video useful and or interesting. All the sources are linked in the video description. And I hope all of you have a wonderful day.